It's certainly been a challenging time for everyone in our community. Throughout the coronavirus pandemic, almost everything has changed about the way we function and communicate, the way we work, the way we interact with each other, and the way we make decisions as a society. So we wanted to provide an opportunity for elected officials in our community to connect directly with you, their constituents, and for you to hear from them. Welcome to Ward Updates, a series of one-on-one interviews with Ottawa City councillors. We'll talk about the issues arising from the coronavirus pandemic, how we're responding as a community, those issues that directly affect you, your friends, your families, and your neighbors. We will also share some of the heroic efforts by people in our community to respond to this crisis, and we'll talk about other important issues that are coming up at Ottawa City Hall in the months ahead. Our guest today is the City Councillor for Ward 12, Rideau-Vanier, Mathieu Fleury. Mathieu, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Mark. It's bizarre not to be in studio with you, but seems like 2020 is that sort of year.
Yeah, no question. So first of all, give us an update on how you're doing. You have a young family, of course, so I'm sure this has been an interesting time for you, and also how the people of Rideau-Vanier have been coping.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. So I represent all of Lower Town, Sandy Hill, and Vanier, what I think to be the best part of our city. I have a young family. My son just turned 3 years old, Jacob, and my wife works for the federal government. So I've been very fortunate that the first 3 months or so, I was at home, and my wife as well. My mom's retired, and she's alone. So we were all three of us working to do the childcare. Heading back into the fall, we're doing the same thing. We were thinking, like many families, what are our options? For us, childcare right now is at max capacity, so we're very limited. But we're looking at options. If a spot becomes available, we'll certainly consider it seriously. I like so many families in Ottawa, I've had the challenge of working from home, of having a young family, and figuring it all out. So I'm no different, but certainly finding ways to cope during this period. And as you can see, I'm back at City Hall office. My team is working remotely, and we're figuring out the childcare at home. And as much as possible, I like to be back at the office. That's my work environment. I'm focused when I'm here, able to connect with residents. And as for Rideau-Vanier, as you know, we're the lowest income community across our city. We also have some of the most number of ground floor retail when you think of the Byron Market, when you think of some of our main streets, Rideau Street, Beechwood, Montreal Road. So it's been challenging. It's been challenging. I also have the University of Ottawa campus, which is a large stakeholder in our community. When we declared the state of emergency, when COVID began, we didn't think it'd be that much work, but I have to say my entire team rolled up its sleeve. The community and the community leaders did the same, and now we're in much better position. Although it's not perfect, we still have it's a work in progress. But many of our businesses have reopened. Many of our schools are reopening, and the majority of our social services agencies are now in place and have reopened and offered programming, which is so important.
We are still in the midst of this crisis, so I know this is a difficult question to answer, but what are your early observations on what we're learning during this time? What are some of the lessons that we can apply going forward? What's going to change about the way we function as a community as a result of this pandemic?
Well, that people like you and I are most resilient because we have options. We have the financial means, we have the local connections to ensure that our livelihood can continue. We likely can continue to run, bike, stay connected, get a paycheck during this period. But those who are less fortunate are even more impacted by this situation. Those who access the food bank, those who rely on our youth that rely on the Boys and Girls Club meals or the morning breakfasts, or our seniors that maybe not have the means or might not have the ability to use transportation, have been most impacted. So what we can learn of this is, how can we support our community? How can we be more equal, especially for our youth? I think youth has been, to me, the hypermost focused, and our struggles around existing challenges for transportation, transit, some of the housing issues that we're faced with, even pre-COVID, that have really flared up during this period. And hopefully, as we get a clearer outlook in terms of what the fall will look like, what the end of 2020 will look like, that we can really make a system shift, looking at what are the future, what's the future of these programs, what are the future of some of our funding efforts to come out of it more resilient, come out of it more equal, and specifically target the groups that have demonstrated challenges to respond to it. And I have to leave a little caveat in this. There's so much unknown. Who would have thought in March that we would be wearing masks everywhere we go, and that we would question the school operations? I mean, there's so much that remains unknown, yet we've seen the struggles of some, and we've also generally seen how resilient our community and city is.
What's your sense, though, of how much there will be working from going forward? There's been a lot of talk about that, but I know it's not for everyone. Not everybody's equipped. Not everybody has the space or the flexibility to do that. And what about public transit, for example? Ridership is at an all-time low right now because of the circumstances. Is that something that is going to continue? Is it going to be a long time before we see the passenger numbers rebound to previous levels?
So many questions. When are people going back to work? What does work offices look like in the future? That will certainly drive transit ridership. The majority of residents in our city afford a car or have a car. So if there's no delay for them to get from point A to point B, no matter where that is, they'll continue to use the car. The benefits of the LRT were almost matching that speed, but also an affordability element, obviously. So I guess the 2 points that you're raising is, what's the future of office spaces and workspaces, mainly in the downtown core? I guess it remains to be seen, mainly our largest employer, the federal government, what that will mean. In my area, it's the University of Ottawa, and the University of Ottawa will have about 30% of their students on campus living in residences, while the majority of the classes, 96% of their classes, will be available online. So I think our learning, our post-secondary learning, will completely transform. What will that mean for our important economy of post-secondary institutions? And then private sector, we've heard recently of the leading organizations like Shopify rethinking completely office spaces. They're seeing some savings. They're seeing opportunities for their employees to be more connected with their family and continue to be able to deliver on their work. So a lot of unknowns. Transit needs to be, we have elements that are already spent. When you think of LRT phase 1, it's open, it's operational. We've had a struggle. COVID has sort of been a relief for the pressure on LRT system. Performance remains of key concern. Phase 2 is under construction. Later this month, a transportation committee will be looking at the STO, because the STO currently have a proposal for what transit will look like from Gatineau into Ottawa. So many unknowns. We're seeing that there's a momentum of spending in terms of transit, yet ridership levels just aren't there currently, but that doesn't mean they won't be there in the future.
Just since we're talking about transit, let's dig a little deeper into the issue of phase 1 of light rail. It's been about a year since it was launched. It has not gone well, to say the least. Of course, it passes through your ward and serves the people in your area. What are you taking away as the lessons from the experience of the last 12 months? And do you have confidence that going forward we can have a properly operating light rail system?
Well, Mark, it's been all but what we planned for. We expected LRT to be that change agent that we had all believed in it. I mean, the benefits compared to the buses were sold. And then when it opened, so much unknown, performance issues during the peak, weather issues at all seasons. We've seen winter as much as the summer. I can only speak to the last few weeks. It seems like the new CEOs that are both in place at RTG and RTM, they seem to be doing the job because the performance has greatly improved since they've been there. The proof is in the pudding. So until the system is used to its capacity under tough weather conditions and reliably, continually, that's when we'll know it works. And for us elected officials, we have to continue to push so that residents of Ottawa can get the value that we all paid into. So it's not a done deal, or it's not an abandon. It's a work in progress. The proof for residents of Ottawa in terms of the effectiveness and the value of that investment will continue to need to be proven. So far, it hasn't.
So what's your confidence level going forward? How do you feel about it?
You know, I continue to be anxious about it. I continue to wake up every morning looking at my phone, seeing, is there a cancellation today? Are there major failures in the system? And until we get days, then weeks, then months of reliable service, then my confidence will grow. Till then, I can only rely on what we've seen over the last year. And that's not up to par. That's not up to what we invested in. In terms of transit and our future and the connection to our community, the concepts beyond LRT phase 1 and phase 2 are undeniable if they work as planned. If the ridership is there, if the system is as effective and as reliable as what council has bought into, as residents of Ottawa have paid into, and again, I can only say that is day-to-day operations that are going to prove that. And every time there's a setback, we need to understand where it's at. We need to understand how it's not going to happen again, and what's put in place. Till then, we continue to be on the very nervous and continuing to try to get answers from OC Transpo and from RTG directly.
The decline in ridership obviously is one of the things that has created pressure on the city's finances, enormous pressure. There's a $192 million shortfall going into next year, some of which, a good chunk of it, but not all of it, will be covered by support from the provincial government and the federal government. But what about the rest of that gap, which is a significant number for the city? You can't run a deficit. What are your thoughts on how that gap can be bridged? Is it going to mean cutting back on services or increasing taxes?
Well, you've touched on the exact number. I want to thank both the provincial and federal level for working with cities. We have direct impacts to residents, and obviously the revenue certainly wasn't there over the last number of months. What's remaining out of the $200 million is close to $65 million, which our mayor and our city CFO continue to be confident we can bridge the gap on that. We don't know what we're going to be faced with in, I guess, 4 or 5 weeks when the directions for budget or even the draft budget come forward. I'm nervous. I'm nervous because, as you know, my community relies on services. I'm the lowest income community. I have a lot of the services agency. We have important transit use. My thoughts are that we need to keep the service levels as is, as much as possible. Can we revert? Can we realign some of our priorities? Can we look at different ways of generating revenue? Absolutely. I don't know if we can in the range of $65 million unless there are major financial tools that are used. As you know, a number of years ago, I believe it was 2 years ago, last hour, we were able to find a gap of $10 million. So that's 6 to 7 times what we're looking at. And yet we've had little impact on resident services. So, short answer is we need to balance budget. I rely heavily on the discussions that are happening between the municipality, the province, and feds to bridge the majority of that gap. What's remaining, if it's under 30 million, I'm confident that we can balance that with very minimal impacts. That said, and we have to put it out there, we have to modernize the way we offer services at very different levels. For example, the majority of Parks and Rec and social services funding was put in place or approved when amalgamation happened. That's 20 years ago. We can invest similar amounts of money in the sector and make way more difference. So does COVID offer that opportunity? Absolutely. But we need time to conduct those reviews and make sure that they're done diligently so that we don't leave anyone behind, yet that we modernize the way we do funding. I'm using Parks and Rec and social services, but it applies to the entire service line of the city, from solid waste to others.
All right, let's turn to a couple of other issues. I know you wrote not too long ago about some issues around mental health and addiction in our community, the opioid crisis, and how we respond to that. There's always been for a long time, a debate about what kind of approach we need to take, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's harm reduction. Just give us a sense of what you're feeling about this. I know it's an important issue for your constituents in particular, but what do we need to do? And when it comes to mental health, of course, we've had challenges in this community already, and I imagine the burden has only increased on people who are struggling because of everything that's been going on this year.
I don't know about you, but I can certainly attest to all of us facing different levels of setbacks over the last year specifically, and that's not pre this year. So, we have a lot to do in terms of mental health. We have to completely change the approach. Just before COVID, I had met with the Royal Hospital. It shared with me how long someone has to wait before they get treatment or support, and that's the Royal. But there's tons of partners that work in that field, and obviously the dollar and the resources just aren't to where it needs to be. But where you started was around addictions, and we're faced with what many communities across North America have been faced with over the last number of years. There's a lot of research in that world. There's a lot of documentaries, for example. Invite you to take a look at the latest Netflix series on the matter called The Business of Drugs, and specifically the 6th episode that talks about the opioid crisis and how large pharma impacted that over time. We're faced with that challenge. What can we do? Number of advocacy organizations in the past were really pushing for supervised injection sites to save lives in terms of the response, but it's only a response. What we brought in front of council was the discussion around safe supply. And safe supply has, in my mind, so many positive. It brings the interface between a doctor, a prescription with the drug user, and it removes all of the community impacts of that. The petty crime that's required to feed that addiction, the interaction with the criminal gangs to access the drug, and then the community impact of using that drug, specifically the behavior and the overdose. So we've seen drops of program information as it relates to safe supply. Pathways for Recovery, for example, has recently opened on Rideau Street, providing close to what I understand to be 300 opioid users in our community with that interaction or that connection with a doctor who prescribes the medication. And that means that the drug that's used is clean, and it's a pathways to recovery. The users are then followed, and many of them have been able to maintain housing, have been able to get employment, and have reduced their use. That is based on the pilot project that Inner City Health Dr. Jeff Turnbull has been running over the last number of years in our community.
While we're on the subject of different models and law enforcement, what is your response to what appears to be a growing movement of people who are saying we need to approach policing differently? Some are saying even that we need to defund the police, and I know that might mean different things to different people, all the way from eliminating police departments to simply a strategic reinvestment of some of the dollars that go towards policing into mental health services and other social services. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are very similar to those of my colleague Ralston King on the matter. Do we have systemic racism in our community? Absolutely. Is police part of the problem? Partly, and we have bigger issues. I think what needs to happen is certainly a complete relook at some of the laws that are in place in terms of the criminal code, in terms of the police act, provincially and federally. And then locally, we need to do a better job ensuring that we have diversity in our police force and that those addictions and mental health calls are responded appropriately by professionals in the field. You know, when you call 911 for an issue, right now the system is based on if it's not police, if it's not fire or paramedics, police is going, and police is asked to fix so many community impacts or those community issues, yet not really equipped. They're a quick response team, and certainly not the best ones for dealing with addictions, mental health. They certainly have a role to play, an important role to play, but you know, I know that in the United States and southern of the border, it's very politically polarizing what's going on, and people take firm stance. I think in Canada, we have a very different outlook, yet we have similar challenges and we have the similar risks. So we have to look at it seriously, holistically. We have to be diligent about the changes that are proposed. And in the end, you're right. If we're seeing that our school system, our youth programming does not offer opportunities, does not respond to what our community needs, especially our low-income youth, then we have to invest there. And where the money comes, well, I know that some are saying take away from police, put it there. Bottom line is we need to identify those needs and make sure they're appropriately funded when it comes to low income, when it comes to mental health and addiction responses.
Let's talk about a couple of issues in your ward. Can you give us an update on the Montreal Road revitalization? Because I know that a project that is, to many people, long overdue, also very disruptive. So give us a sense of where things are at and how it's going to affect development plans going forward.
Mark, thank you for the opportunity. I've put a lot of effort in, and there's so many initiatives that are going on in Vanier. I invite residents to visit ottawa.ca, and in the search bar, just visit Vision Vanier. You'll see those 6 initiatives. The top one is Montreal Road. We're redoing Montreal Road from Cummings Bridge, which is the bridge when you go down to Rideau Street, you cross into Vanier. That's right there at North River and Montreal Road, and it extends right through to Saint Laurent Boulevard. So it's a large stretch. 2.1 kilometers, $52 million. It's a 3-year construction project. Basically, from the building face to building face, from one side to the other, we're redoing the street, the sidewalk, we're putting the hydro poles underground. It brings a reset to a corridor that's been challenging. And you're right that once those investments will be in place, it also offers the opportunities for the development. And the development opportunities came way before this. In 2014, the city did a full review of the zoning along the corridor. It prepared it for development. What should that main street look like? And the fundamentals are there. Ground floor along the entire, commercial along the entire stretch, and residential or office above. And there's many applications that are in submission at the city currently. That'd be Main and Main, so that's the corner of North River and Montreal Road. Those are large properties, rental buildings, office space that are proposed. Vanier Parkway and Montreal Road also has 3 big buildings that are proposed, residential rental units. Further down, there's a regional group that owns right near the beer store, a number of properties. So there's really unique opportunities. We have to get it right. It has to be done right. There are good and bad examples. We don't want Montreal Road to look like Rideau, where it's all lot line to lot line, canyon buildings. We don't want it to look like Westboro, Beechwood starting to see development. So Montreal Road would land something in a combination of all these attributes, but have a very different character by the zoning that's put in place. I see it as an opportunity. And you're right that having the right underground infrastructure, sewer, water, the modern sidewalk widths and roadway, good transit, public art will make a big difference in being the spike to this.
Let's talk about housing for a moment. I know you've looked at this issue closely. You have served on the board of Ottawa Community Housing, and there are a couple of levels to this. One is affordable housing. The other is homelessness. Those are related issues, but in a way they're 2 separate issues as well. What are your thoughts, and especially given what we've seen during this crisis, how this pandemic has put additional pressure on people who are disadvantaged. What are your thoughts on how we continue to move forward towards some solutions in that area?
It's tough to say, but I don't blame anyone who is on the streets right now from struggling to feel safe in a shelter. We had seen major safety issues in the past, but obviously just now with the physical distancing, imagine being in one room with six other individuals less than 2 meters apart for the next 12 hours over sleep. Most of us would be very uncomfortable, and many of our homeless residents feel that way. That's the reality. So now we have to look at what opportunities do we have. And we have to look at, in my mind, the tail end of this, the challenge, which is housing affordability, and housing policies. And all levels of government are guilty in some ways. I blame the majority of the structural issues around housing at the federal level, and specifically CMHC, really putting entire focus on home ownership and housing affordability for homeowners. I happen to believe that the way to support and the way to bring long-lasting investments in housing starts with building rental. We have to see 10,000 units in rental built in our city. And as part of that, what we'll see is an equalization of the market, which will bring by itself affordability. Then the city through that can bring rent supplements. It can bring some portable rent supplements that make a huge difference. And obviously Ottawa Community Housing will play an important role of building new affordable housing. It has to be a partnership. We can't do the same old ways. We can't do the old models. We have to strike and align around what will be the future of housing investments and how do we bring affordability throughout that process. But in my mind, there's something we're not getting right, and we're so focused on home ownership that we lose the importance of rental.
All right, we will have to stop there. Mathieu Fleury, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mark, thanks for having me on. Everyone, stay safe. I know it's not an easy period. We're with you, and as always, feel free to reach me at my office. I'm glad to follow up.
Okay, thank you for your time. Mathieu Fleury, the City Councillor for Rideau-Vanier, in this ward update. Thank you for watching.